The reason I advocate for open employment for people with disability, I think, is self-evident. Everybody in this community, if they're going to participate fully in all aspects of life, that almost the pinnacle of evidence that a person's participating is whether or not they're participating in open employment. It's good from every perspective. Obviously, from an individual perspective, we know that to participate in life we have to have a financial backing behind us, and we get that through our work. But it's good for the whole community to have people active, to have people contributing, to have people contributing their intelligence, their capacity, their diverse thinking. All of those things are absolutely right for our community. And then on top of that, we add the fact that if people are working, they're paying taxes and making the economy better. And it's a no-brainer. I'm personally involved in promoting disability reform for a couple of reasons. Some might look at me as a person in a wheelchair, and I've been in a chair since I was 16, so from all of my adult life, and say, oh, the obvious reason Mark's involved in disability reform is because he has a disability himself. Well, I'm not going to deny that that's at least partly true. I'd say that's fairly self-evident. I have lived with a disability myself, and I know how damn hard it can be for so many people with disability to do what everybody else takes for granted. But there's another key reason why I'm involved in this. I've also spent most of my adult life, all my adult life, in the business sector, mainstream, hard-nosed business, and I look at the lack of utilisation of this huge group of people in Australia as the greatest business opportunity Australia has in front of us. We are always looking for new ways to make our economy and our society better and stronger. And to me, this is a better business opportunity than I've ever seen in mainstream business. My formula for inclusion of people with disability starts at the most basic fundamental level. I believe that the most significant reason why so many people with disability who can and want to be working and participating in our community are not doing so today is exactly the same reason why people from other socially disadvantaged groups are not participating today, and that's because the general community simply does not believe that people with disabilities are capable of contributing and taking part in our community. And it's not just the general community, the unwashed community, if you like to call it that. Many people with disability themselves and those close to them also don't believe that they can take part in our society to the fullest extent of their capacity. If we don't start by fundamentally challenging that notion about the capacity of people with disability, then all the other things that we might do and are currently doing in the social development space, I don't believe will ever make much difference. I think the largest barrier to employment of people with disability today is an attitudinal one. I don't believe employers, the majority of employers, look at a person with a disability and just fundamentally believe that the person can contribute to their business. It's as simple as that. All of the other stuff, there's support for people with disability. The disability employment network that's out there is providing all the support that people with disability need to be fundamentally included in the workforce. But if an employer, when the person knocks on the door with their degree or their diploma or their education in hand, demonstrating a willingness to participate in the workforce, demonstrating a willingness to come to work every day, participate, contribute to the business, unless the employer looks at that person and thinks, yeah, I can see that, then it's not going to go anywhere. Changing that attitude is incredibly difficult to do. But there are a couple of key lessons to me. Firstly, I don't believe there's just one way of addressing this problem. I think, like many other large problems, challenging problems, there's more than one way to skin a cat, is the term, more than one way to address the problem. And therefore, looking for this silver bullet, the single approach, is not the right thing to do. And I think we can borrow a lot from mainstream marketing thinking in this respect. When I look at the attitudes of employers in Australia from a market segmentation point of view, which is simply just saying, Well, surely they don't all believe exactly the same thing about people with disability, just as people don't believe the same thing about any product or service or anything else. The answer is no, they don't. There are some employers out there who are already convinced. There's another bunch of employers out there that have never thought of employing a person with a disability. They probably would if they were just challenged with it. But then there's a bunch of people out there who would like to do it, but they think it's just all too hard, or I just don't get my head around all of this. And then there's a bunch of people at the bottom of the pyramid, the real, well, I'm going to call it as it is, the mongrels of the world, who wouldn't employ anybody that's not white Anglo-Saxon male aged between 30 and 35, a person looks exactly like them. Now, they're the sorts of people that will probably never employ a person with a disability, never give a person with a disability an opportunity. And for those people, I think we need to use the 4x2 method, I call it. We need to hit them over the head and say, you've got no choice here, pal. We've actually got a capacity to do that. It's called the Disability Discrimination Act. It's actually unlawful for you, mate, to be not giving this person a chance. But we need to be using that tool much more effectively for that group of people for whom that's the best approach. So the answer to the question is there's more than one approach, but all of them together will, I think, address the issue. The Disabilitycare Australia role in all of this is a really interesting one. Disabilitycare Australia, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, is and has always has been intended to be a solution for part of the overall challenge of disability. It's the National Disability Strategy that defines all the things that Australia needs to do to provide a level playing field for people with disability. And the NDIS is really only targeted at one of the 6 elements of the National Disability Strategy, what's called individual and community support stream of the strategy. But I think the NDIS has a much bigger potential influence and role over this. And in fact, the exciting thing to me about the launch of the NDIS and the role that it has and the methodology that's being used, an insurance-based system, is that perhaps for the first time in Australia's history, we've had an entity in Australia that has a direct interest in ensuring that people with disability get into the workforce. Even though they're not necessarily directly involved in the process of getting people into the workforce at that hard-nosed employment interview end, that end of the spectrum, they're critically involved in making sure the person has the tools they need to get out of bed and have the equipment and so on they need to get into the workforce. But the NDIS fund itself will only survive if it achieves the objectives of full participation of people with disability in our community, for the simple reason that it's been proven many times before that if people with disability are participating fully in our society, particularly in the workforce, they will be contributing back into the economy, and it's the economy that's going to fund disability support. We've also found at a micro level that when people are participating, their support needs are actually lower than they would have been if they were sitting at home all day. And so here we've now got, for the first time, a body that has a really direct interest in ensuring that people with disabilities actually participate in the workforce. There are many reasons why an employer would want to employ people with disability. One of my frustrations is that we've been saying these reasons for decades, and it's making very little difference. For some companies, they're finally getting the message, and when they are, they're doing a damn good job. I look at the Westpacs and the Telstras and the IBMs and a whole range of small companies who now, for quite some time, they got the message, they employed a few people with disabilities, and all of a sudden it was, why haven't we been doing this for ages? This just makes good business sense. But they're still in the minority, the vast minority. And one of the, in my view, one of the biggest selling points, in addition to all of the traditional things that are said, that a diverse workforce is a good workforce because you want to reflect your customers and all those sorts of things, all of which are valid. There's another key thing that's not stressed as much as it should be, in my view, and it's a point that I think is very simple. If an employer looks at a person with a disability sitting on the other side of the interview desk with a diploma or a degree or whatever in hand, already saying, I want to work for you, that person represents something that the other person without disability that they interviewed just before this person does not represent. If a person's got through the mire of difficulties that that person's had to get through to get that degree in the first place, to actually even get to the job interview on time because the bus wasn't accessible, their carer didn't turn up to get them out of bed, etc. If the person's sitting there, that's exactly the sort of person you want in your business. The smart businesses know that it's not just the diploma. Oh yes, the person knows how to use a computer or whatever else the diploma actually says. The smart employers know that it's the people that have got that capacity to sort out complex problems, capacity to communicate their needs effectively. And the person with disability that's getting through this mire to actually get there has developed life skills, critical life skills about planning, about management, about communication, that the average person possibly hasn't developed to anywhere near the same level. So I say to employers, I suspect not many of them get it, at least not at the beginning, but I say to many employers, where you might have sort of struggled with this notion, oh, I've got five people that I've just interviewed, one of them has a disability, the disability person will be at the bottom of the list because it's all going to be hard and difficult and so on. I say, think again about this. What does that person truly represent? What could that person truly be contributing to your business? Understand the person, not understand just their experience, their job experience. They may not have any job experience. Don't look just at the diploma and say, what courses did you do at university? All that's important. But look at the person themselves and say, what do they bring in total? This person's an incredibly motivated person who's developed great life skills. They should be high up on the priority list. What's been my biggest achievement in employment of people with disability? That's a struggle. It's a struggle because, well, yes, I guess I can look back and think, yeah, there have been some successes in there, and some of them have been great. They felt good at the time. One of the things I've done, I guess, many years ago, I sort of used my position in IBM at the time to drive an emphasis on employment of people with disability in IBM that subsequently led, not through my work, through the work of many others, but having sowed that seed, IBM's become one of the most significant employer of people with disability in the country. So I look back on that and I feel some sense of pride that I had a role in that, and I can look to some other specific things as well. But I do have to look back on now half a lifetime, if not more, of direct involvement in one form or another in this disability employment space. And I have to look at the statistics that are showing me that in all the years I've been involved and the years before that, there's actually been virtually no improvement in the employment of people with disability. Now, I'm not going to castigate myself too much about that and take total responsibility for the failure of Australia to address the disability employment issue, but I do look back on that and think, even as a person who has had the good fortune to have had some influence over this process, including at a strategic and sort of national government and so on level, I look back on and think, we're not making any difference here. So I do find that personally challenging to feel, I sometimes question myself and say, could I have done something different here? You know, have I taken the wrong approach? Am I using the wrong messages? And I guess the answer is, I don't feel that all the effort has given anywhere near the return I had hoped it would. The disability employment service providers in Australia have an absolutely critical role in all of this. And like my comments about the NDIS and the Disabilitycare Australia agency and process and its potential to influence areas outside its immediate area of responsibility, I think the DES network can also look for opportunities that are outside its perhaps traditional thinking about what it's specifically responsible for. For example, I'd have to say that when I look at the people with disability that are being employed, often with the help of disability employment service providers, That's obviously a very good thing. As I say, I don't feel the numbers are anywhere near what we would all hope they would be, but that's obviously a very good thing. But I do also think that the numbers are telling us that probably what we're doing is getting people with disability who are already very close to being job ready, who've dealt with all of the other stuff they've had to deal with, often through their own hard work and good luck and all sorts of stuff. A small percentage of people with disability are coming to the point where they're now ready to talk to a DES provider about looking for the job and getting support for that job. I think with all the knowledge that the DES network has, it could reach further back in that process. I think one of the key things we need to do to really close the gap in workforce participation, and not by just small amounts, by massive amounts, close the participation gap to virtually zero. I know a lot of people think I'm in cloud cuckoo land when I say, as I do frequently, we currently have over a 30% gap in workforce participation between the general population and people with disability in Australia. There are over 1.2 million Australians of working age with disability who are unnecessarily sitting at home doing nothing. That represents over a 30% gap in workforce participation. But what should it be? Should it be 20%? Should it be 15%? No, it should be virtually zero. While there are a small percentage of people whose disability is so severe and profound, and particularly in the sort of mind-based disability areas, people with intellectual psychiatric disabilities are really profound, who really will struggle to participate fully in society. Their needs are critically important, of course they are, and we need to provide support so they can lead decent lives as well, but they're the minority here. We should be closing this 30% workforce participation gap to something closer to 1 or 2%. That's where we should be aiming. Now, if we're going to do that, we need to reach right back to the onset of disability, for when people are first born, or those that incur their disability later on. That's where the journey towards full participation starts. And it's a journey that goes through many different stages. It's a life learning journey that people go through to ultimately participate in the workforce. And I think the knowledge that's tied up in the disability employment sector could be taken back to the onset of disability. You know, maybe when they're in school, a disability comes on early in school. Why aren't we setting an expectation right back then that young person who's just got a disability would have been years away from achieving employment anyway, even without the disability? But let's start now sowing the seed in those people's minds, in those people with disabilities' minds and their families' minds and everybody else around them. Sow the seed then that, you should be thinking about employment. Now, who can do that better than the people who've been at the coalface of disability employment now for decades, the disability employment service providers? I think there's a very critical role here for disability and service providers to be not only empowering people with disabilities, as they often do, with work skills, but potentially reaching further back and being with people with disability on a journey. Now, that would take a rethink of the disability employment service model, what it does, how it's funded and everything else. But I do think that there's enormous knowledge tied up in the disability employment sector that could be of value for many other people with disabilities.